It's been a while and I think it's well overdue for me to do another SQL video. And I want to kind of follow up on some of the issues that I've seen in recent months, particularly regarding the current integration work that I've been doing. So here's an example. You have a SQL server that is not running on a default port, but is running on a default instance. And in order to demonstrate that behavior, what I've done is I've fired up two SQL servers, two servers. One is a SQL server, the other one is going to just act as my remote machine, because the behavior is not the same locally as it is remotely. So in this case, I'm just going to quickly prove that we have different server names, that I'm not cheating and I'm actually connecting to a local instance and doing something funky behind the scenes. And what you've got here is, if you follow the best practice benchmarks, one of the things it tells you is to change the default port. So if I go ahead and change the default port, that then asks you to do a restart, so you go ahead and do a restart. And on the remote machine, you then try to connect to that instance. And what happens is, with the remote machine, once the server actually starts up, the remote machine doesn't see it. And the interesting reason for this is actually because it's a default instance. Somewhere in the back of Microsoft's programming, they seem to have made a small mistake, and the result is that if the default instance is the one that's there, it assumes that it's still running on 1433 and doesn't attempt to use the browser service, even though the browser service is clearly running on my other machine. The browser service would normally resolve it and say, hey, this instance is running on this port, go for it. But since that's not the case, the result is that you're unable to connect. However, since the service also uses things like name pipes, if you try to connect to it locally, so I'll just fire up Management Studio on the local machine whilst proving that my remote one can't connect. If I connect with the remote one and specify the port, mind you, so if I tell it, hey, connect to server with the 5555 that I've used for the port, that will actually connect normally. But locally, I will not need to even specify the port, because it will actually use the name pipes. Now, this behavior is obviously a bit frustrating at first, because you can be the SQL administrator, and I know many of you do use Management Studio locally and go, well, it's running local, so can't be a problem, right? And you'll end up doing lots of firewall debugging, maybe some troubleshooting with people, explaining that obviously from your point of view, SQL Server is running fine. And in hindsight, it kind of is. But the Microsoft products like Management Studio and a few others are behaving strangely in terms of they're not respecting the rules. So this is the behavior. Now, there's obviously two ways you can go about this. One of them is to manually specify the port number every time. Depending on what you're doing, if you're using random port numbers or a fixed port number, that may or may not work out for you reasonably well. You can also say, you know what, I'm not going to use default named instances, I'm actually going to use a name instance, which resolves the problem as well. But for those of you who want to use a default one and use custom ports, you're kind of only really left with the option of specifying the port number, and I think this is a major oversight on Microsoft's behalf. That aside, I'm sure there will be bug fixes in future, and the problem itself doesn't relate just to the 2017 that I tried. It also relates to 2016, 2012, and as far as I can tell, even the beta 2019 is affected. So this is a widespread issue. Hopefully you will not experience this and therefore not go through the amount of confusion and pain that I had to find out what the problem was. Now, if you liked this video, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do, and as always, subscribe for more content.